Magic is both an art and a science. Certain things cause certain effects to happen. At the same time, they have to be done with a certain intention and perhaps a certain flair in order to work.
Was Crowley a master of 20th century occult magic, as some have claimed? His beliefs were nothing new. Crowley took his lead from the Egyptians, early occultists who believed that spells could heal the sick and make crops grow. Some things that seem supernatural can often become accepted fact. Sir Isaac Newton believed that an invisible force called gravity, that held planets in orbit around the sun, created action at a distance. Newton hesitated to share his groundbreaking theory of gravity for fear that it would be branded as magic.
Science nowadays really is touching against ideas dealing with where magic and spirituality and religion intersect. And they're both ways of trying to find out about how the world works.
The occult means secret or hidden, and its early masters were regarded as true magicians, but they were also the first scientists. Their discoveries in the occult arts of astrology and alchemy gave birth to modern scientific disciplines.
You go back to ancient times, there was no science. So the magicians and the alchemists and the proto-mathematicians, they were doing science, but they were also doing literature and philosophy and cosmology and religion, and there was no sorting out of those things. Since the birth of what we would call modern science, science and the occult have sort of separated the paths.
Many still view the occult with suspicion, but modern science is often working on the edge of the supernatural, trying to solve mysteries that confronted the first magicians.
Serious physicists are contemplating time travel. Serious physicists are contemplating parallel universes. Serious physicists are trying to understand the 11 dimensions of string theory. And when you get into those realms, you start to look to myth and sort of magical thinking and almost surreal thinking as a way to even talk about those things.
Were the early occult masters keepers of secrets that modern science is only beginning to rediscover?
Hey friends, welcome to another episode of History They Try to Hide. We have a couple more videos left in this series until we move on to another exciting series that I can't wait to announce. Today's video is all about occult psychology, spiritual science, mysticism, and the Babylonian religion. Let's tackle part 1, psychology and its occult history. Many of you guys don't know the foundations of modern psychology that we have today. Not just psychology, but science, physiology, medicine, and mathematics. All the knowledge we have of the world today was founded on occult men who received light from demonic spirits. But don't just take my word for it. I'm going to prove it. This is not a conspiracy. It heavily documented fact. They have crafted this so-called knowledge so well that we actually believe it. From the astronomy, the understanding of space, and down to even archaeology and creation. I did a video already on dinosaurs and the lies we were told, all in my History They Try to Hide playlist. Psychology has always been a tool for the occult. They now justify people having past life experiences and condone all types of spiritual warfare as disorders. I did a video on Carl Jung already that's also in the playlist, but he was a big occultist who has influenced psychology, science, and mystical beliefs. He spoke to the dead and received knowledge and insight from spirits, and his family were all spiritualists. I also did a video on alchemy already and the Philosopher's Stone. All of these videos are in the History They Try to Hide playlist. There has always been a quiet, unsettling thread running beneath the surface of intellectual history, one that rarely gets discussed openly. Many of the very men celebrated as pillars of science, philosophy, and literature did not describe their discoveries as purely rational achievements. Instead, they often spoke of illumination, of insight that came from somewhere beyond themselves. They used words like revelation, inspiration, even guidance language that sounds far less like laboratory method and far more like spiritual encounter. Isaac Newton, for example, is remembered today as the father of classical physics, the man who explained gravity and motion. But what is far less emphasized is that Newton devoted more of his life to alchemy and esoteric writings than to what we now call science. He believed the universe was governed by hidden laws placed there by the gods, waiting to be uncovered. His studies of alchemy were not merely about turning metals into gold. They were deeply spiritual, rooted in the idea that divine secrets were encoded into creation. Newton saw himself not just as a scientist, but as a decoder of the gods' hidden language. Galileo, too, is often framed as a purely rational rebel against religious authority. Yet he never saw science as separate from the gods. He believed nature itself was a book written by the gods. But even beyond that, Renaissance Europe, the world Galileo lived in, was saturated with mystical philosophy, Hermeticism, and what many would now call occult thought. The pursuit of knowledge was intertwined with the belief that divine truth could be accessed through both observation and spiritual insight. Then there is Carl Jung, a figure who stands at the crossroads of psychology and the spiritual realm. Jung openly described encounters with what he called archetypes and autonomous inner figures, beings that spoke to him, guided him, even corrected him. He recorded visions, dreams, and dialogues with these entities in what became known as the Red Book. Jung did not dismiss these experiences as mere imagination. He treated them as real forces within the psyche. But what is striking is how closely his descriptions mirror what Scripture warns about familiar spirits, deceptive voices that present themselves as sources of wisdom. And this pattern does not stop with these three men. Throughout history, countless artists, inventors, and writers have claimed that their greatest ideas came suddenly, almost as if downloaded into their mind. Nikola Tesla spoke of visions so vivid he could build machines entirely in his head. Socrates claimed to be guided by a daimonion, an inner voice that instructed him. Many poets and authors describe their work as being dictated rather than created. From a biblical perspective, this raises a serious question. What exactly are these voices and inspirations? Scripture makes it clear that not all spiritual influence is from God. In fact, it repeatedly warns that there are other sources of knowledge, ones that appear enlightening but ultimately lead to confusion and destruction. Beloved, believe not every spirit, but try the spirits whether they are of God. What the world calls genius or divine inspiration may, in many cases, be something far more dangerous, an opening of the mind to spiritual realms that were never meant to be accessed apart from God. This may also explain another pattern that is difficult to ignore. Many of these same brilliant men suffered deeply. Newton experienced severe emotional instability and periods of isolation so intense that he had a nervous breakdown. Jung went through a prolonged psychological crisis filled with visions and inner turmoil that nearly consumed him. Nietzsche, another philosopher obsessed with transcendent ideas, ultimately collapsed into madness. Tesla died alone, plagued by obsessive behaviors and mental distress. It is often romanticized the idea that genius comes with suffering. But from a biblical lens, it looks less like coincidence and more like consequence. When a person seeks knowledge outside of God's order, especially through occult or esoteric means, they are stepping into territory that Scripture explicitly warns against. There shall not be found among you anyone who practices divination or a consulter with familiar spirits. For all that do these things are an abomination unto the Lord. Deuteronomy 18:10-12. The human mind was not designed to carry the weight of hidden, forbidden knowledge. When people pursue illumination apart from God, they often open themselves to confusion, oppression, and instability. What begins as curiosity can become torment. This is where the modern relationship between science and spirituality becomes deeply ironic. Science presents itself as the rejection of God, yet at its core, it is simply the study of His creation. It is man observing patterns, laws, and structures that already exist and trying to explain them. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Psalm 19:1. Every law of physics, every biological system, every mathematical constant points back to an intelligent designer. Science does not replace God, it reveals Him, even when it refuses to acknowledge Him. But when science drifts into the territory of ultimate truth, when it tries to answer questions of meaning, purpose, and the unseen, it often begins to mirror the very thing it claims to reject. It becomes speculative, philosophical, and at times spiritual in ways that are not rooted in God. This is why Scripture emphasizes wisdom over mere knowledge. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. 1 Corinthians 3:19. True understanding does not come from chasing hidden knowledge or seeking enlightenment through unknown forces. It comes from God alone. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and it shall be given him. James 1-5. The tragedy is that many of history's greatest minds were searching for truth, but they looked for it in places that ultimately led them into darkness. They touched something real, something beyond themselves, but without discernment, they could not distinguish between what was holy and what was deceptive. And that is the real warning. Not all light is from God. Some light blinds. Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11:14. So while the world celebrates these men for their brilliance, a deeper, more sobering perspective asks, what did it cost them? And more importantly, where did that light truly come from? I'm going to show you guys a documentary put together by several prestigious Ivy League professors, psychologists, neurologists, psychiatrists, physicists, scientists, and occultists, so that you can hear from the horse's mouth yourself. It is called Secrets of the Occult, and the link to the full film is in my description for those who want to dive deeper.
But men like Isaac Newton, Galileo, Carl Jung are responsible for creating some of science's biggest breakthroughs that were once considered mystical. Scientists have picked up where occult practitioners have left off and sought to solve mysteries that the magicians had long tried to understand.
When people have an experience of a past life, the truth is unshakable. It's a self-evident truth, and anybody could doubt the existence of that past life. But the people who have had the experience, you're not going to shake that truth from them. They know.
How do you know some of the things we now regard as supernatural and inconceivable may turn out to be perfectly valid, legitimate science 50 years from now?
The original occultists believed the universe was a field of consciousness that they could access to decipher the work of the gods. Ever since the Renaissance, scientists have pushed far beyond accepted boundaries. Before the age of technology, scientists relied on belief and intuition.
We think we are separate from each other. We're actually just part of one great universe. And that was a kind of core idea that the occult magicians had. They expressed it beautifully at one point by saying, as above, so below.
These magicians believed that the universe and the mind were linked, a connection that quantum physicists are still trying to prove.
And people find this very exciting, the overlay between the way the brain works and the way the universe works.
But other New Age practices like channeling and exploring past lives,
All these experiences that are claimed to be occult sometimes originate in the brain from brain pathology. And this makes you wonder about all of these phenomena, what's causing them. Just because you find that people with temporal lobe seizures experience God doesn't negate the idea of God. But it does make you wonder, what religious experience is all about, because there are neural structures in the brain that predispose you to religious belief and mysticism.
the link between magic and science has always been strong. And once the mystical is proven, it can become scientific fact. Isaac Newton was born in the 17th century, when man still believed the cosmos revolved around the earth. He is known both as the father of modern science and the last of the great magicians.
Newton was an extraordinary intellect. He was able to concentrate for endless hours, and sometimes it seemed days on an issue. He could keep in mind all of the parts.
Newton vividly imagined his theories, and only later backed them up with experiments, a practice now known as an altered state of consciousness.
Well, I think creativity really requires something like the acceptance of intuition, acceptance of inspiration as the starting point for ideas that turn out to be profound, important, and even scientific ideas. If you open yourself to the cosmos, you will be filled with new knowledge.
Newton was trying to build on the theories of a man who died in 1642, the same year he was born, Galileo. Galileo was mapping the stars and the planets. By then, astrology was a centuries-old science.
In the ancient mystery schools, and let's say Egyptians as well as Pythagoreans, their aim would have been to connect to the gods and implore them to do something, and then the gods, being powerful, would do the thing.
Galileo was not trying to contact the gods. He was trying to explain their work. During the Renaissance, scientists followed the teachings of Aristotle. the work of this 3rd century BC Greek, were the theories accepted by the Catholic Church. Galileo thoroughly discredited the sacred Aristotelian worldview of the Church.
Isaac Newton was fascinating. He was born on Christmas Day. He was a widow's son. He was raised in a kind of austere surroundings and went off to college and kind of never stopped being at college and studied the rest of his life. From a young man, he studied everything there was in the universe to study.
Scholars like Newton were thrilled to discover new ideas in science, religion, and magic. Newton was not only a scientist, he was an avowed alchemist.
Most of the brilliant people in history, and Isaac Newton was one of them, went into alchemy, went into various occult pursuits because they wanted to find out how things work, and they were willing to go as far as they needed to satisfy their inquisitive minds.
In Newton's time, there was no hard distinction between magic, spirituality, and science. Scientists used any method to expand their knowledge. He spent years searching for the crown jewel of alchemy, the philosopher's stone. The stone was not an actual gem, but a higher level of consciousness that would enable scientific and spiritual breakthroughs. Alone in his room with his alchemical experiments, Newton would go for days without food or sleep. In 1687, Newton published his masterwork, Principia, and he became an international sensation. In it, he set down his 3 laws of motion: the law of inertia, the relationship between force and motion, and his final rule: for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. Even though Newton had explained the universe, emotional difficulties would affect his work. In 1675, he had a nervous breakdown.
He had a number of things that happened to him all at once. He became depressed and holed up in his apartment and couldn't be brought out. He had to be dragged out of there by his friends. The legend goes that he had been practicing actual alchemy with chemistry and that the fumes may have made him somewhat crazy or psychotic. There's all kinds of ways to read that, and he might have had simply a nervous breakdown.
Newton never made another scientific breakthrough, but his work would endure. In 1660, an elite group of British scientists formed the Royal Society, history's first organization devoted to the pursuit of science.
The Royal Society started out sort of as a smart guys club, where they got together and discussed every conceivable topic that was, probably a little risque, of course, because, at various times, England was in the throes of religious clampdowns.
The threat of the church did not stop them. Newton himself would lead the Royal Society for 24 years. He is said to have uttered just one sentence during all those meetings. He asked for the window to be opened. But his near mystical focus would inspire another generation to look for the universe within, the human brain. But another member of the Royal Society, Thomas Willis, was about to overturn Aristotle in a different field, medicine. Willis began the first scientific exploration of the brain and its elusive software, the mind. Like Newton, Willis was an alchemist willing to experiment to get to the truth. Willis was the first to dissect the nerves leading to the brain. He explained how they functioned together. His lectures held his audiences spellbound. In 1664, he published Cerebrae Anatomy, at the time the most comprehensive study of the brain. A young student named John Locke built on his work and investigated the nature of thinking itself. Locke was primarily a philosopher. In 1660, he published his Essay Concerning Human Understanding. In Paris, medical astrologer Franz Anton Mesmer stumbled almost by accident upon hypnosis. At the time, Mesmer was experimenting with magnets as a means of curing illness.
Well, Franz Mesmer would have people sit in a tub, and he used magnets with these tubs, and it was often referred to as anomagnetism, which is interesting because magnets have recycled again today, and medical doctors are using electromagnetism as a way of healing.
Mesmer first believed that the magnets exerted the invisible force of animal magnetism. Later, he thought that the force emanated from within him, and he abandoned the magnets. In actuality, Mesmer had only rediscovered another lost occult art. The first induced hypnotic performance, recorded on papyrus in a British museum, was given at the court of Khufu in Egypt over 5,000 years ago. Later, seers at the Greek oracle of Delphi used self-hypnosis to foresee the future.
Modern hypnosis, as practiced in the United States, begins with Franz Mesmer. But if you go back even further, every culture has a way of going into a trance. It could be using music, it could be using dance, it could be sitting in meditation.
His treatment became popular in the 1770s. and Mesmer's fame quickly spread as scores of patients claimed themselves cured through mesmerism.
He was able to put people in a trance and suggest to them things that were good, like getting better, like healing. He became famous for that, and they actually had to have a committee of scientists, and it was actually Ben Franklin was one of the committee who tried to decide whether anything about this was real or not.
In 1843, London surgeon John Elliotson began using what he called the mesmerizing coma to perform major surgery without pain. But he had laid the foundation for modern hypnosis, a practice that is now accepted as a form of treatment by the medical establishment.
Namely, how does it fit into what we understand about the brain and mind? What is this hypnosis business? How can you enter somebody else's mind and make him wiggle his hand or do silly things? It doesn't make any sense. It's very repeatable. You can do it on hundreds of people. And that's been staring at us for over 100 years. We know it's a perfectly valid, legitimate phenomenon. We just don't have an explanation for it.
Conditions like insanity and hysteria were treated using a vast array of misguided cures, from leeches to exorcisms.
Things like what we now call schizophrenia or depression, those kinds of things looked like some kind of infection by demons.
No one ever thought the brain could be their source. Locke's essay on human understanding gave rise to a new science, psychology. In 1885, a 29-year-old Viennese doctor named Sigmund Freud was struggling to cure the hysteria he encountered in many of his female patients. Freud had begun his medical career researching the nervous system, but nothing in accepted science could help his patients. Then he tried hypnosis. He put his patients under and found that they remembered past traumas. Physicists had recently developed a new understanding about energy, that it could not be destroyed, only transformed. Freud discovered the unconscious. Freud saw the human personality as a psychic energy system. Energy that was not expressed consciously was diverted into the patient's unconscious, where it created neurosis. Freud identified repressed sexual energy as the root cause of all mental illness. Freud invented psychoanalysis as a method for releasing the sexual traumas buried in the unconscious. This was the new frontier of the study of consciousness. And though much of Freud's work would eventually fall out of favor, his work provided the foundation for modern psychology. The conservative Freud would never have identified himself as an occultist, but one of his followers would prove to be both a pioneer in the field and an occult practitioner.
He wanted to know everything about everything. He read everything. He traveled to Africa. He traveled to India. He traveled to America. He was somebody who had a voracious appetite for experience and for trying to understand the psyche in all times and places and all locations on the globe.
Carl Jung was born 10 years before Freud invented psychoanalysis. The son of a minister, Jung conducted experiments in spiritualism. He became a psychologist to explore the dimensions of the mind, but never lost his lifelong fascination with the occult. His hero Freud became both a mentor and his nemesis.
He didn't meet Freud until 1907. And when they met, they spoke for 13 hours straight. And one of the things that came up was the occult. Jung had been a defender of Freud's sexual theory of hysteria before they met. He'd been a public defender of that, but he didn't believe the sexual theory explained everything. And when he sat with Freud during this 13-hour thing, Freud got a very, very serious expression on his face and looked at Jung and said, you must promise me one thing, dear son. You must promise never to abandon the sexual theory and make of it a dogma and unshakable bulwark against the black tide of mud. And then he hesitated and said, of occultism.
Jung refused to believe that sexual repression explained everything, and he was not about to give up the occult. But Freud made certain that Jung paid a price.
Jung was, at the time of his break with Freud, he was president of the International Psychoanalytical Association. And Freud did not want to leave Jung in charge of the whole shop. And so behind the scenes, in what you might call an occult practice, he formed a little committee and he gave each one of them a little signet ring and he swore them all to secrecy, and they began to plot in a kind of conspiratorial way about how to get rid of Carl Jung.
After the break with Freud, Jung spiraled into a 6-year depression. He retreated to his country house in Bullingdon. Like Newton so many centuries before, he went in search of his own philosopher's stone.
Jung constructed a tower at Bullingdon, and he built it in some sense by his own hand, and he carved various kinds of stones out there with mystical figures on them.
He struggled with his own depression and emerged with a new kind of psychology. one that was steeped in mystic thought.
He used tarot cards, he used astrology, but more importantly, whether it be tarot cards or astrology, Carl Jung believed in the intuition. Carl Jung once said, the therapist's job is to get his or her patient in touch with the intuition, and when the therapist has done that, the job is basically done.
During his retreat, Jung concluded that astrology, alchemy, mythology, and the I Ching were ways the first magicians understood the human consciousness. His biggest breakthrough, he saw the psyche as an energy field far bigger than a single personality. He called this the collective unconscious.
The collective unconscious includes all the things that are not personal to us, that transcend that. They're the transpersonal or impersonal contents of the unconscious that Jung called archetypes. They're the typically human components that don't have anything to do with us necessarily just personally. They're not about our personal experiences. It's not about our mother or our father. It's about the very idea of mother and father.
Both Jung and Freud practiced the altered state of consciousness used by magicians to gain their deepest insights.
For Freud, this was a method of free association, and for Jung, this is a method of active imagination, where you deliberately induce a fantasy and you talk to aspects of yourself that are personified in image form. This would be like in the occult or in mediumship or in seances, thinking that you're talking to the dead when you're actually talking to yourself or your many inner selves.
While Freud had isolated the personality into a bundle of neuroses driven purely by sexual repression, Jung had brought the individual to higher ground, a place within a broader humanity that had meaning and continuity.
We have both a personal unconscious and a collective unconscious. So the personal unconscious is more aligned with our soul, and then our collective unconscious is the wisdom, the archetypes, the myths, the universalities that anybody can tap into. So we all have our own personal path that we're on, and we all have a collective path.
Jung's ideas have inspired many New Age practices.
Channeling might possibly come from something like Jung's collective unconscious. Probably most people who are channelers would say it comes from a higher level of wisdom. And maybe it's the same thing. It certainly is a related kind of concept to the collective unconscious. But the typical presentation is as if there's some being, a departed soul, or maybe a group of them who now exist in some other dimension, but have chosen to help us out by channeling some of their wisdom through one of your friends or neighbors.
In Jung's work, dreams could yield valuable insights. Some psychologists have taken this one step further into a technique called lucid dreaming.
Lucid dreams are a special category where not only are you dreaming, but you know you're dreaming, and you actually may even be able to directly influence the direction of the dream.
But Jung's influence did not stop with psychology. His work inspired a physicist who would try to forge a connection between the occult and science. In 1905, the 30-year-old Jung met a young German man working as a clerk in a Swiss patent office, Albert Einstein. In some ways, Einstein was a mystic at heart. As a child, he had observed the movements of a compass needle and vowed that he would one day learn the mind of God. Like Newton, he would enter an altered state of consciousness which he called mind exercises, and intuitively arrive at his discoveries. Only later, Einstein would back them up with formulas and proofs. That year, Einstein published 5 papers of new physics in the journal Annalen der Physik, theories that rewrote the rules of the universe. In it, he posed his theory of relativity, which held that time and space are relative, changing concepts, not absolutes. Consciousness appeared to affect the universe.
Einstein had a very strong, basically philosophical conviction that a theory of physics should be complete, that if you know everything there is to know about a system, you can predict everything that it will do thenceforward.
In quantum physics, there is no absolute. Everything changes according to observation.
Einstein famously said that God does not play dice with the universe, and he repeated this often enough that one of his colleagues, the attribution varies, told him, "Would you stop telling God what to do?"
Einstein rejected quantum physics, but quantum physics could not be ignored, and the concepts of the occult would help some understand this uncharted territory. To the new breed of quantum physicists, the mind itself played an integral role. How matter behaved depended completely on the observer.
The idea that physics, or that the physical reality is somehow a construct of the mind or is dependent on it, is certainly one of the ways that you can interpret quantum mechanics. And this is one of the reasons there's so much argument generated, because some people really like that idea and some people really hate it.
15 years after Einstein published his groundbreaking papers, Wolfgang Pauli, barely out of his teens, wrote a brilliant exposition of Einstein's relativity theory. The two pioneers of quantum mechanics, Max Born and Niels Bohr, encouraged Pauli to join their field. These mind-numbing problems became Wolfgang Pauli's obsession. Though a difficult and troubled man, Pauli was a master of intention. Other scientists called it the Pauli effect.
His colleagues in the experimental laboratories in physics said, please stay away, because sure as he would arrive in the laboratory, all the experiments would stop working. They even claimed that if Pauli went by the town in a train, that the experiments would stop working. He, like many of the others we think of as great scientists, was consummate intender. He could intend what was about to happen, and it would happen in a certain sense. He was one of the most creative figures in quantum mechanics because of that.
Pauli, like Newton, fell deep into this work, and eventually he had a mental collapse. In 1948, he went to the newly created C.G. Jung Institute to seek help from the now famous psychologist. As he walked into the room, the Pauli effect occurred. A vase suddenly fell to the floor. Both men would later say that when the vase shattered, they recognized their destiny. Together, they would try to comprehend the universe using both physics and psychology. The incident itself led them to develop the concept of synchronicity, where two supposedly random events collide to create meaning.
Synchronicity, as Jung defines it, is a correspondence between an inner psychic state, psychological state, and some external event. The correspondence having a high degree of improbability, so that it appears random or accidental or merely coincidental or merely chance.
Jung and Pauli combined their brilliance and intuition and arrived at a theory of the universe. If matter behaves according to observation, then have human beings made their own reality? Have people's collective thoughts and dreams created our world? It's a notion that many scientists reject, but it echoes the occult.
The ancient occultists' idea of a latent consciousness that's pervading the whole world would make some of the interpretations of quantum mechanics a great deal simpler, because if consciousness is essential to the act of observation, to bringing a definite reality out of these quantum clouds of probability, life in some ways gets simpler if there are other sources of consciousness out there besides just us.
If true, it implies a fascinating realm of parallel universes and multiple dimensions.
The way string theory does an elegant thing is that it says, okay, there are these tiny little things called strings, and they make up all other particles that there are in the whole universe. And these strings are really just energy. And therefore, we've now gotten down to the very, very tiniest particle or element of what there is. And then since they're all just energy, we can think of ourselves as merely energy, which would be very satisfying for many people. There's a religious way to see that, and there's a chemical way and a physical way to see that.
When I do a past life regression, the first thing I do is try and create a bridge. The bridge is some connection from the current life to a past life. It could be a fear, a phobia, it could be a job, a relationship. It really doesn't matter. Sometimes even had dreams turn into be bridges into the past life. So once I do a thorough history, then I start to hypnotize a person. So what we try and do with a past life regression is help people learn from their previous lives so they don't make the same mistakes in their current life.
Are we left with imprints of those who lived before us?
We have this action and intelligence at a distance. The thing is, we have to connect to it. We have to be conscious of this possibility.
Will discovering past lives someday be as commonplace as X-rays? Most scientists reject the idea.
In the case of Röntgen, you did the experiment, everybody could repeat it, we accept it. In the case of Galileo's small stone and big stone, any child can go and repeat it. But that's not always true. Let's take velocity of light, and Einstein said it's finite. It took very, very detailed quantitative experiments to prove that was correct. You can't just do it quickly. Maybe some of these phenomena are so elusive and so tiny that it's going to take ages to disprove. But this sounds like a cop-out to me. It just doesn't have a ring of truth. If you can't test a proposition, there's no way of testing it. It's not even part of our knowledge. It's as good as gibberish.
Some explain past lives as simple associations.
You say, well, I have seen this before, and yet I couldn't have. How is that possible? Well, maybe it was my previous birth. That's the only way this could have happened. Because there's no way I could have met you, for example, prior to this evening, but I have this distinct feeling of having met you. How is that possible? Oh, maybe it was my previous birth. It's not your previous birth. It's your memory playing tricks on you.
Progress has long been achieved by innovators who were willing to go far beyond accepted reality.
In an interesting way, it almost seems that the evolution is really a kind of revolution, if you will. You sort of revolve through the same set of ideas, express them in different ways, find new tools for probing more deeply into the core understanding. But ultimately, we're looking at the same picture, the same universe, hopefully refining the understanding a bit, but we're working hand in hand with the ancient magicians.
Today, the mind is as mysterious as the universe once was. Will scientists one day discover that human beings create their own reality?
We're going to get some very big breakthroughs through science, but it's going to come by science looking at what some might call the occult. There's certain things that I find very interesting in New Age beliefs because I think they make explicit things that science just hasn't gotten to yet. I think everything that we don't have a scientific explanation for today, we will eventually have a scientific explanation for.
Only time will tell what breakthroughs are in store at the crossroads of science and the occult.
Part 2. Come out of her, my people. Come out of Babylon. There is a reason the Bible does not treat the spread of occult knowledge as harmless curiosity. It treats it as a pattern, one that has appeared before, risen to power, and brought entire civilizations to ruin. Because this isn't new. From the very beginning, humanity has been drawn to knowledge that God did not give. In Eden, the first temptation was not violence, not greed, but forbidden knowledge. For God knows that in the day you eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and you shall be as gods. Genesis 3-5. That was the original seduction. Enlightenment without obedience. Wisdom without God. The promise that man could ascend, awaken, and unlock hidden truths on his own terms. And ever since that moment, history has repeated that same pattern, just under different names. By the time you reach ancient Babylon, that pattern had fully matured. Babylon was not just a city, it was a system. A spiritual headquarters of human pride, rebellion, and secret knowledge. It was there that occult wisdom became organized, refined, and institutionalized. Astrology, divination, sorcery, ritual magic, these were not fringe practices. They were woven into governance, religion, and daily life. The book of Daniel even describes Babylon's elite as magicians, astrologers, and sorcerers, men who advised kings and interpreted reality through hidden arts. Babylon taught the world that truth could be accessed through initiation, that power came through secret knowledge, and that man could manipulate spiritual forces for his own gain. It was the birthplace of what many call the mystery religion, a system of hidden wisdom passed down, disguised, and rebranded across generations. And though the empire itself fell, its spirit never did. Because what we are witnessing today is not something new, it is something returning. Modern society often presents itself as enlightened, progressive, and free from superstition. But look closer, and you'll see something eerily familiar. Practices once condemned are now normalized, even celebrated. Astrology is mainstream. Manifestation, energy work, spirit guides, tarot, these are no longer hidden in the shadows. They are marketed, aestheticized, and openly embraced. What ancient Babylon practiced in temples, modern culture now packages as self-discovery, but scripture already warned this would happen. In the book of Revelation, Babylon reappears not just as a place, but as a global system. For all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, Revelation 18-3. That wine is not literal. It represents influence, something intoxicating, something that spreads, something that alters perception. And what is more intoxicating than the promise of hidden power, of secret knowledge, of spiritual control without submission to God? The modern New Age movement, in many ways, mirrors this perfectly. It offers spirituality without accountability, power without repentance, enlightenment without truth. It invites people to open themselves spiritually, but without discernment of what they are opening themselves to. This is why the Bible does not separate these practices from idolatry or deception. It groups them together, over and over again, as part of a larger system that leads people away from God while convincing them they are becoming more aware. And this is where the connection to the days of Noah becomes impossible to ignore. The Messiah himself said, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." Matthew 24-37. The days of Noah were not just about violence, they were about corruption. A world where boundaries were broken, where forbidden knowledge spread, where humanity crossed lines it was never meant to cross. Genesis 6 hints at a time when the natural order was being tampered with, when the earth was filled with both moral and spiritual chaos. Ancient traditions outside the Bible even expand on this, describing a world obsessed with hidden knowledge, unnatural experimentation, and communication with spiritual entities. Whether one takes those extra accounts literally or not, the biblical conclusion is clear. The earth became so corrupted that judgment followed. And here we are again, a world fascinated with merging science and spirituality, a culture increasingly comfortable with altering the human body, the human mind, even the definition of what it means to be human. A generation drawn to awakening, yet often disconnected from God entirely. It is the same pattern, just modernized. And the warning has not changed. Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, and that you receive not of her plagues. Revelation 18-4. That is not just a poetic statement. It is a separation command. Because Babylon, in the biblical sense, is not just a place you live, it is a system you can participate in, a mindset, a way of seeking power, truth, and identity apart from God. And according to Scripture, that system does not end in enlightenment. It ends in judgment, just as it did in the days of Noah, just as it did with ancient Babylon. The pattern is consistent. When humanity becomes obsessed with forbidden knowledge, when it reaches for spiritual power outside of God, it eventually collapses under the weight of that rebellion. So the question is not whether society has accepted occult knowledge. It has. The deeper question is whether we recognize what we are returning to. Because not everything that feels like awakening is leading to life. Some things are leading right back to Babylon.
The trail of the occult begins in Egypt 5,000 years ago. Just before the rise of Egypt's great pharaohs, hieroglyphics or pictographs were invented. Egyptians used them to document their history and religion, and to practice complex systems of astronomy, astrology, and geometry. They believed their powerful knowledge came from the god Thoth.
Thoth, or Tahuti, was the Egyptian god of magic. And more than just the god of magic, he was the god of writing, of astronomy, of mathematics and science. He invented language, he invented writing.
Only priests with special training were allowed access to Thoth's sacred knowledge. Imhotep, builder of the first pyramid, was one of the chosen.
Thoth was considered to be the one who gave us writing and numbers and the arts of self-cultivation through works of consciousness. Some people thought he was a person who was then deified through his accomplishments. Other people feel that this has been a mythical entity from the beginning.
Legends held that a book of magic written by Thoth contained the secrets of the gods.
The Book of Thoth was actually considered to be in the astral plane. Not a physical thing, but something that you had to actually travel in consciousness to arrive at. And so this is probably one of those very old incidences of channeling where an individual would get into a special state of mind, contact the Thoth energy wherever it was to be found, and then be tutored by this multilingual, multi-code kind of consciousness.
If you were to describe the Book of Thoth, you could also, look at a building like the Pyramid or the Sphinx and say that the teachings contained therein are pages within the Book of Thoth. So all measurement, all words, all concepts are part of the Book of Thoth.
But no Book of Thoth has ever been found. The god is said to have buried it beneath the Nile and protected its secrets with a deadly curse. Modern archaeologists eventually discovered that the Babylonians had created much of the knowledge Egyptians credited to Thoth. As early as 4000 BC, they were the first to measure planetary movements. They invented the abacus, the first sequential numeric system, and some of the earliest forms of astrology and astronomy. This information spread to Egypt and helped launch one of history's greatest cultures. And like the Egyptians, the Babylonians regarded their knowledge as divine.
Every temple was an observatory. It was actually an astronomical site for watching the planets. The whole concept of divining means trying to understand the will of the gods. And in order to understand the will of the gods, you have to have something to read about them, something that you see they're doing.
The Babylonians used one of the occult's oldest arts to understand their world, divination, or accessing the supernatural.
The movements of the planets through the heavens used to be considered the footprints of the gods and goddesses. And when they would catch up with each other and have interactions, or one would go retrograde and then go forward again, these things were all understood to affect the world.
It began in the Stone Age, when shamans invoked the spirits to ensure the success of the hunt.
Certain people who were distinguishable by early man as having sort of mystical experiences, and these would be the religious representatives of the clan. These people would have been communicating in ways of imagination to kind of talk to the gods or talk to the spirits or affect certain things that would happen.
In Egypt, divination developed into a sophisticated system of rituals and ceremonies designed to contact the gods who ruled their world.
Of course, you were trying to influence things like your success in business or the crops. The Egyptians used rituals, they used incantations, they used symbols to convey all of those things. The pharaoh himself was the head of their religion, so that he was probably the chief practitioner of both their religion and their magic.
Much of what is called ceremonial magic, the casting of spells, the use of magic words and incantations, came from the Egyptians. When Phoenician traders spread this knowledge throughout the Mediterranean world, magic became practical.
They codified an alphabet that would line up the sounds of speech, the number canon, and the zodiacal signs, planets, and features in the heavens, so that you could, with this alphabet, spell sacred words. You could also count and figure and calculate, and you could also do astronomy.
The sacred origins of these disciplines were gradually forgotten. In 1212 BC, Ramses II, the last great pharaoh of Egypt, died. Invading armies conquered the land of the Nile. Its occult secrets were lost, but not forever. After the decline of Egypt's extraordinary culture, another civilization rose, Greece, in the 6th century BC. It was aided by one of the most probing minds in history, Pythagoras. Our alphabet, the buildings that surround us, even the music we hear, owes a debt to this brilliant philosopher. In his pursuit of wisdom, Pythagoras traveled broadly, searching for lost occult knowledge. He found it in the mystery schools scattered throughout many different cultures. Pythagoras synthesized the elements of these teachings into a new discipline, philosophy. Its foundation, numbers.
He believed that mathematics and philosophy and an understanding of divine all went together.
We can't say he originated anything, but he condensed and boiled down the knowledge of the world and then brought it to a practical application.
Pythagoras identified numbers as the most fundamental elements of creation.
As we look at science in this day and age, we're finding that the whole world is filled with these mathematical constants. You've got pi, you've got the speed of light, you've got the force of gravitation. So the idea that numbers describe the world seems to be the case.
In 518 BC, Pythagoras opened a school in the Croton region of southern Italy. His carefully selected disciples were called mathematicoi. Their initiation was rigorous. 3 introductory years, followed by 5 years of absolute silence, then 5 more of training. Only then were students ready to learn the most sacred mysteries of numbers.
They believed that number was like God, and to connect with this was to be talking to God. And so from that arises a whole lot of symbolism that later becomes numerology, Kabbalah, things like that.
Pythagoras discovered that the mystery schools shared the belief that all of creation was at one with God.
He did a huge amount of explaining sacred mathematics by showing how the 1 splits and becomes 2, the 2 finds a synthesis and becomes 3, the 3 breaks open and becomes the 10,000 things. And that same story you read in the I Ching, you read in other metaphysical ancient documents, because everybody was trying to understand, how do we get number out of all?
Many credit Pythagoras and his school with the development of numerology and the efficient Greek alphabet eventually adopted by much of Western culture. Pythagoras also applied numbers to decode music, which Greeks regarded as the language of the gods. He invented the monochord, which defined the numerical ratios of the musical scale. Pythagoras believed he had solved the mysteries of the universe.
You have a new reverence for Egyptian and Greek and Roman and Hebraic tradition, because people are looking for really empowering knowledge and looking to understand the secrets of the ancients.
Art and science swept through Western Europe in the 1400s as it ushered in the Renaissance. The Renaissance brought about a new spirit of learning, and academies sprung up throughout Europe. The Hermeticum dazzled Renaissance scholars, and occultism was reborn. Could the idea that human beings shared a direct link to God undermine the authority of the Church? The discovery of the Hermeticum during the Renaissance created a new generation of occultists. They sought to combine religion with science and magic, a dangerous undertaking in a society ruled by Christianity. Dee's guidance, Queen Elizabeth officially legitimized the most significant occult science of the Renaissance, alchemy. Alchemists had two goals: to heal illness and to turn base metal into gold. They believed success could be achieved by finding the philosopher's stone, a mystical agent that would also produce a higher level of consciousness in the alchemist.
Everything that we know and do today in our modern science was developed by the alchemists. Laboratory techniques were part of the alchemical tradition. The observation of results, the scientific method is a child of alchemy.
Alchemists were on the leading edge of science. They discovered phosphorus, zinc, the distillation of alcohol, the germ nature of diseases. They were the first to understand how blood circulates in the body. The Church viewed their unorthodox experiments and scientific breakthroughs with growing suspicion.
We are speeding up what nature does. We're speeding up the rate at which the metals evolve. We're speeding up the rate at which medicines are combined and raise consciousness. And the Church felt that you can't be speeding up God's creation without recourse to demons.
Despite his work in alchemy, Dee's true occult passion lay in divination. He believed that he could apply scientific methods to communicate with supernatural beings. Dee's obsession with contacting the angels would have disastrous consequences. This art of manipulating objects like bones, tea leaves, and tarot cards had arrived from the Muslim East in the 14th century and become a popular method of fortune-telling. But Dee used a divination method known as scrying. Dee relied on looking into a crystal ball that would reflect back supernatural information.
Scrying is a long-time-old technique, scrying into glasses, mirrors, bodies of water, anything that would have a reflective surface, and see if you could see not just the material things, but the spiritual things standing behind.
These efforts were unsuccessful until one day a young man named Edward Kelly appeared at his door. Kelly seemed to have the talent to see into the shadow world.
Their system involved Edward Kelly looking into a amethyst crystal and describing what he saw, and John Dee would then record these communications.
Kelly began receiving messages from the angels. They spoke in a language he called Enochian, from the lost biblical book of Enoch. These transmissions are early examples of what New Age followers now call channeling. Dee had fallen out of favor with the court. The man who began as a leading scientist of the Renaissance ended his life, penniless, branded as a sorcerer.
Dee's main legacy was not to science, it is to magic. And it's because of those who have come after, who have seized upon what he created and made it into a new worldview, whether it's consciousness arts or ceremonial magic or divination, could take place inside these new parameters that they set up.
Occult ideas became embedded in the traditions of secret societies, such as the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians.
They were tending to do them passed on among secret brotherhoods and organizations because these are very powerful and dangerous ideas, dangerous to status quo, dangerous to institutionalized religion. So there's an element of underground secrecy associated with some of these themes.
These havens of safety began to flourish across Europe. Secret societies were instrumental in the new age of enlightenment that swept through Europe in the 1700s and even helped in the founding of American democracy. So what would cause a resurgence in the occult? In rural New York, two unlikely sisters would inspire a national obsession with the occult. Magic would once again capture imaginations. On March 31st, 1848, Sisters Leah and Margaret Fox publicly declared that they had contacted spirits from beyond the grave. An American fascination for communicating with the dead occurred almost overnight. The Fox sisters used a technique called a seance, which quickly became one of America's most popular pastimes. people gathered in a darkened room while a medium tried to make contact with the spirit world.
There would be tambourines and other bells that would sound, and the medium would actually be able to exude, ectoplasm from their nostrils or their mouth, and it was this sort of spiritual substance that allowed the spirits of the dead to manifest and make and appear. And in other cases, the medium would simply become a conduit or a channel through which the deceased were able to speak.
Many who practiced spiritualism believed it would lead to scientific proof of the existence and immortality of the soul, and they gained an iconic champion when the Russian-born Madame Blavatsky arrived in New York at the height of spiritualism's popularity. She soon became the self-proclaimed decoder of ancient occult secrets.
And she was attempting to correct the errors of Christianity by bringing in mysticism and spirituality from other cultures.
Blavatsky's seances were the talk of New York. Mysterious letters would appear, written by spiritual leaders she called the Great White Brotherhood.
Blavatsky was not above taking advantage of the popularity of seances to push her own cause, and she used these seances to very spectacular effect to materialize letters written by these ascended masters as instructions being passed down to her.
The Brotherhood dictated to her the books that became the foundation of a new science of mysticism, theosophy.
And she totally altered the spiritual landscape of Western civilization by introducing those concepts.
She was very much a pioneer in bringing ideas of Eastern esotericism into the West. She focused on the similarities between Christianity and Hinduism and Buddhism and other spiritual traditions, arguing that there is, in fact, a tradition that underlies all spiritual faiths in the world.
Blavatsky regarded her work as spiritual science and made connections between recent scientific advancements and occult beliefs.
And at the time that she was becoming famous, this business of spiritualism and channeling, and especially seances where you'd call up your dead ancestors, that was going all over the Western world, and she felt like that was charlatanism. So she wanted to represent a model that stepped outside of that and spoke to the verities, the truths, the larger things.
A man described by newspapers as the most wickedest man alive claimed he had penetrated even deeper into mysteries. Born in 1875, Aleister Crowley was raised in a strict religious household. His mother nicknamed him the Beast from the Book of Revelation. It was a title he embraced his entire life.
He identified himself as the Antichrist, as the force that would take away this terrible Christian program which had so warped his childhood.
Crowley began studying the occult as a member of the Golden Dawn.
The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn was the secret society par excellence of the Victorian age in England.
Crowley, though, ultimately broke away from the group. He would find his own system of belief after a trip to Egypt, where his wife received a mystical signal that told him to prepare himself for a message from the gods. Heeding the call, he began spontaneously writing a book he called the Book of the Law.
This book announces a new law for mankind. And in fact, it tells us that we are very emboldened and brightened spiritual entities, that in fact, we are as the gods.
The Book of the Law was another synthesis of Eastern and Western spirituality. Crowley called his new system the Lema. It incorporated principles of magic that he said he had learned from ancient Egyptian and other occult sources.
Aleister Crowley defined magic as the art and science of causing change to occur in conformity with the will. And his whole approach is basically to empower the practitioner to make their intentions happen, to materialize what they want to have happen in the world.
The Lema's fundamental law was, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. While this may have meant pursuing a higher path for some, for others, it excused every variety of deviant behavior. Some critics claim that Crowley himself was one of its worst offenders.
Crowley was practicing sexuality as a spiritual path. He reduced a great deal of symbolic teachings to their essence, which is essentially the duality or the polarity between male and female. And he experimented greatly within that sphere to understand what mysteries were contained within the sexual act.
Crowley went on to start his own secret society, the Ordo Templi Orientis, and wrote numerous books about meditation and ceremonial magic. He also helped reinterpret tarot for the 20th century. While popularized by Italian noblemen in the 1300s as playing cards, some say tarot's origins date to ancient Egypt. Over time, they acquired occult significance. Crowley developed a deck of his own, called the Book of Thoth, based on the Egyptian magic he had studied. A popular divination tool today, tarot is said to reveal information about the seeker and the questions about his future. Crowley's writings, like Madame Blavatsky's, were heralded as forerunners of many New Age ideas. But despite his serious work in occultism, ultimately he became infamous for his use of drugs and decadent sexual behavior. As Hitler rose to power in the 1930s, Crowley's reputation was fatally damaged. He wrote pro-Nazi propaganda and was soon an outcast. After World War II, it was rumored that Hitler had used Crowley's and Madame Blavatsky's writings to help him create his theory of a master race. Ill and addicted to opium, Crowley spent his final days in a boarding house and died in 1947. Like other occultists before him, Crowley attempted to learn the secrets of the gods, only to be discredited and condemned by society. Once again, occultism seemed to disappear. It would take the drugs, rebellion, and social upheaval of the 1960s to usher in its next revival. Occult practices languished on the fringes of society for most of the 20th century, but they resurfaced during the hippie movement of the 60s. Popular gurus like the Maharishi and Timothy Leary promoted altered states of consciousness that could lead to higher levels of self-awareness. Individualism became the goal of millions of young people who rejected traditional religion to find their own direct route to God. By the 1980s, New Age ideas had become mainstream. Madame Blavatsky's writings became pivotal in reinterpreting occultism for modern audiences, and even Aleister Crowley's reputation was somewhat restored.
There was this boom in occult interest that resulted in Crowley being almost a pop culture icon. The Beatles put Aleister Crowley on the cover of Sgt. Pepper. You have musicians like David Bowie and Jimmy Page becoming very interested in Crowley. He experienced a renaissance, as it were, in the 60s and 70s and has been a very popular figure ever since.
Occult belief systems are now embraced by millions of New Age followers who pick and choose from their wide array of concepts to fashion their own individual brand of spirituality. The holistic philosophy of New Age beliefs continues to grow in popularity.
We're surrounded by material wealth and technology.
Some of the secrets that they thought they were working on were the secret of eternal life, the secret of being able to be without disease, then the great secrets of transformation, let's say of lead into gold, but that's like not the only one. Maybe one of the transformations is the human being into a godlike thing. And it's a wonderful thing that now we come around to particle physics and people thinking that life is pure energy and that maybe there is a connection between those ideas, that maybe the power to become godlike is in the ability to transform yourself.
Medicine and science have benefited from the input of occultism, and in the future, what we think of as magic may play a role in even greater discoveries.
Now, our next video in this series, The Most High Willing, is on Eastern mysticism. I just want to say a huge thank you to all the supporters that have sent Cashapps and PayPal. I've seen it all, and I just want to say thank you to you guys who understand why a lot of creators are pushing away from super thanks and going towards PayPal and Cashapp because of how YouTube is doing us behind the scenes with it. I appreciate it, though I cannot send everyone a personal message or personally say thank you. I want to end every video by saying thank you because it really helps to push out content unfiltered to you guys. May the Lord reward you tenfold.